We've had like the idea of voice-controlled computers for a long time. They've never, to me, felt natural to use. And this one, the fluidity, the pliability, whatever you want to call it, I just can't believe how much I love using it.
최근에 OpenAI가 GPT-4o를 발표하였습니다. GPT-4 옴니라는 모델을 내놓아서 지금 굉장히 이슈가 되고 있는데요. 가장 인상적이었던 건 역시 무료 사용자들도 4o 모델을 사용할 수 있게 풀어준 건데요. 아직 모르셨다면 얼른 GPT-4o를 무료로 사용해보세요. 굉장히 빠르고 답변의 퀄리티도 좋습니다. GPT-4o가 출시되면서 멀티모달이라는 단어를 많이 들어보셨을 겁니다. 멀티모달은 텍스트 입출력뿐만 아니라 이미지, 음성 등 다양한 입출력을 지원하는 AI 모델인데요. GPT-4o 의 멀티모달 기능은 최근 발표 시연에서도 볼 수 있듯이 굉장히 놀라웠습니다. 이번 영상에서는 해외 유튜버 로건 바틀렛이 오픈AI CEO 샘 알트만 대표를 인터뷰한 영상을 번역을 하고 요약해서 가져와 봤습니다. 이번 영상에서는 샘 알트만 CEO의 GPT-4o 출시 비하인드와 GPT-5의 출시 예상과 인공지능에 대한 생각, 그리고 AI 분야에서 가장 영향력 있는 사람의 인사이트를 엿보는 시간을 가져보도록 하겠습니다. 여러분들이 보시기 편하게 자막은 위스퍼 AI를 활용하여 한글로 번역하였으며 핵심 내용들만 요약해서 편집하였으니 편하게 시청해 주시기 바랍니다. 그럼 바로 보러 가시죠.
You made an announcement earlier today.
We did.
Multimodal 4o.
Yeah.
That's the Omega sign, right?
Just the like
The-
like Omni.
Yeah, Omni. Okay. It works across text, voice, vision. Can you speak to why this is important?
Because I think it's like an incredible way to use a computer. We've had like the idea of like voice-controlled computers for a long time. You know, we had Siri and we had things before that. They've never, to me, felt natural to use. And this one, many different reasons. What it can do, the speed, adding in other modalities, the inflection, the naturalness, the fact that you can do things like say, hey, talk faster or talk in this other voice, and that it's the fluidity, the pliability, whatever you want to call it. I just can't believe how much I love using it.
Yeah, Spike Jonze would be proud. Are there use cases that you've gravitated to?
Well, I've only had it for like a week or something, but one surprising one is putting my phone on the table while I'm like really in the zone of working, and then without having to like change windows or change what I'm doing, using it as like another channel. So I'm like working on something, I would normally like stop what I'm doing, switch to another tab, Google something, click around or whatever. But while I'm like still doing it, to just ask and get like an instant response without changing from what I was looking at on my computer, that's been a surprisingly cool thing.
What do you think the principal means of communication between humans and AI is in 2 years?
Natural language seems pretty good. I'm interested in this general idea that we should design a future that humans and AIs can sort of use together, use in the same way. So I'm like more excited about humanoid robots than I am for other forms of robots, because I think the world is like very much now designed for humans, and I don't want that to get reconfigured for some more efficient kind of thing. I like the idea that that we talk to AI in language that is like very well human optimized, and that they even like talk to each other that way. Maybe, I don't know. But I think this is generally an interesting direction to push.
Is there a job title or a type of job responsibility that you could envision existing or being mainstream in 5 years because of AI that like is maybe niche or non-existent today?
That's a great question, and I don't think I've ever gotten it before. It's people always ask like, what job is going to go away? The new one is a more interesting question. Let me think for a second. There's like a lot of things that I could talk about that I think are sort of less interesting or less huge. What I'm trying to do is like come up with the areas of like, what will 100 million people do or 50 million people do? The broad category of new kinds of art, entertainment, sort of more like human-to-human connection. I don't know what that job title is going to be, but I think, and I don't know if this like we get there in 5 years, but I think there's going to be a premium on like human in-person, like fantastic experiences. I don't know what we'll call that, but I could see that being like a very huge category of something new that we do.
The most recent public tender of OpenAI was 90 billion or something in about there. Are there one or two things that you sort of look at as milestones that will get OpenAI to be $1 trillion company, short of AGI?
I think if we can just keep improving our technology at the rate we've been doing it and figuring out how to continue to make good products with it, and revenue keeps growing like it's growing, I don't know about specific numbers, but we'll be fine.
Is the business monetization model today the one that you think creates the $1 trillion equity value?
I mean, the ChatGPT subscription model like really works well for us. Like surprisingly, I wouldn't have bet on that. I wouldn't have been confident it's going to do as well as it has, but it's been good.
Do you think post AGI, whatever that term actually means, we'll be able to, I don't know, ask AGI what the monetization model is that might be different?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should be able to.
I think we maybe saw in November, not to rehash, the existing OpenAI structure left some things to be desired, which I don't think we need to rehash in total. You talked about it enough, I think. But you've spoken to making changes along the way. What do you think the appropriate structure is going forward?
I think we're close to being ready to talk about that. We've been hard at work on all sorts of conversations and brainstorming there. I think hopefully this year, I think we'll be ready to talk about this calendar year.
You tell me first.
We'll see.
When Larry and Brett Taylor got Battlefield promoted to board directors, I was waiting for, my call never came through, but one of the interesting things I think about preconceptions around AI, to your point on the monetization model and all that, is I think I've heard you speak about it, manual work obviously first, followed by white collar, followed by creative. Obviously, it's proven to be kind of the opposite in some ways. Are there other things that are counterintuitive that you've looked at being like, well, I would have presupposed it to be this way, but it's actually proven to be the exact opposite?
That's definitely the mega surprise to me, the one that you mentioned. There's other, I don't think I would have expected it to be so good at legal work so early, just because I think of that as a very precise, complex thing. But no, definitely the big one is the observation of physical labor, cognitive labor, creative labor.
I've had Eliezer on the podcast
How
before.
was that?
It was wonderful. We sat for the longest podcast I've ever done. I think it was 4 hours of us
He has more free time than me, so I apologize. I can't go that long.
We can do multiple sessions. We don't need to do them all now. I think that his points, stay fairly
I'm
consistent.
grateful he exists.
He's a very interesting guy to sit down with for 4 hours and talk. We went a bunch of different directions. But I'd be remiss as a friend of the pod to not ask a fast takeoff question. I'm curious, there's so many different fast takeoff scenarios, and one of the constraints that I think we point to today is just a lack of AI infrastructure, right? I guess if there was some researcher developed a modification to the current transformer architecture where suddenly the amount of data and hardware scale needed drastically reduced, more like human brain or something like that, is it possible we could see a fast takeoff scenario?
Possible, of course, and it may not even need a modification. It is still not what I believe is the most probable path, but I don't discount it, and I think it's important that we consider it in the space of what could happen. I think things will turn to be more continuous, even if they're accelerating. I don't think we're likely to go to sleep one day with pretty good AI and wake up the next day with genuine superintelligence. But even if the takeoff happens over a year or a few years, that's still fast in some sense. There's another question about, even if you got to this really powerful AGI, how much does that change society on the next day versus the next year versus the next decade? And my guess is, in most ways, it's not a next day or next year thing, but over the course of a decade, then the world will look quite different. I think the inertia of society is a good, helpful thing here.
What do you feel your motivations, this pursuit of AGI, outside of the equity? I think most people take solace in the fact that even if I have some higher mission, I still get paid for it in some ways. What are your motivations now coming into work every day? What's the most fulfillment derived from?
Look, I tell people this all the time. I'm willing to make a lot of other life trade-offs and sacrifices right now because I think this is the most exciting, most important, best thing I will ever touch. And it's an insane time, and I'm happy it won't be forever. Someday I get to go retire on the farm and I'll remember this fondly, but be like, oh man, those were stressful, long, stressful days. But it's also just incredibly cool. I can't believe this is happening to me. It's this is amazing.
Was there a single moment, I guess we go back to the fame example of not being able to go out in your city or whatever, but has there been a single moment that was most surreal that oh geez, I don't know. I mean, you've done a podcast with Bill Gates. I'm sure you have your speed dial. If I took your phone right now, it would have a lot of very interesting people on it. Was there a single moment over the course of the last couple of years that you were this is a uniquely surreal moment?
And kind of every day there's something that's wow, if I had a little bit more mental space to step back, it's this would be crazy.
Kind of a fish in water.
But yeah, it is kind of that effect. After all of that November stuff happened, that day or the next day or whatever, I got I don't know, 10, 20 texts, something like that from major world, presidents, prime ministers of countries, whatever. And that was not the weird part. The weird part was that happened and I was kind of responding, saying thanks or whatever. And it felt very normal. And then we had these insane, super jammed 4.5 days in just this crazy state. And it was just weird, not sleeping much, not really eating, energy levels very high, very clear, very focused, but just your body was in some weird adrenaline charged state for a long time. And then it was all this happened the week before Thanksgiving. It was kind of crazy, got resolved on Tuesday night.
You canceled our podcast?
Canceled our podcast. Sorry, I don't usually cancel things. Anyway, then on that Wednesday, now it's the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Ali and I drove up to Napa and stopped at this diner. It's very good. And on the drive up there, I realized I hadn't eaten in days. And then all of a sudden, kind of normal, it was just okay, this is normally where we'd be doing on a weekend, heading up, whatever. And go to Gott's, order 4 entrees, heavy, fried, heavy entrees, 2 milkshakes just for me. And I just sat there and ate. And it was very satisfying. And as I was doing that, one of them, president of this one country, texted again and just said I'm so happy this all resolved, great, whatever. And then it hit me that oh yeah, all of these people had texted me and it wasn't weird. And the weird part was realizing that had happened in the middle of it and that should have been this very weird experience and it wasn't.
Huh.
So that was one that sticks out.
Yeah, that is interesting.
My takeaway is human adaptability to almost anything is just much more remarkably strong than we realize. And you can get used to anything as the new normal, good or bad, pretty fast. And I kind of over the last couple of years have learned that lesson many times. But I think it says something remarkable about humanity and good for us and good as we stare down this big transition.
I remember post 9/11, I'm sure you remember exactly where you were, but I was in Summit, New Jersey, in our town, just, whatever, dozens of people passed away. And how close the town came together after a terrorist attack happened. And it seemed so normal, that it was just the normalcy of it. Or I have friends in Israel right now and you talk to them about it and they're like, no, it's normal. I'm like, well, there's a war going on. It's got to be surreal. And they're like, well, I mean, what are you going to do? You go about your day, you go get your food, all that. And it's amazing, these psychological impacting things. At the end of the day, we need to go get food and we need to, talk to our friends and all this stuff. So it is amazing how much that can happen.
It really, genuinely, that's been my big surprising takeaway to feel it so viscerally.
As you think about models becoming smarter and smarter, what you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier with the creative element. What do you think remains uniquely human?
I think many, many years from now, humans are still going to care about other humans. I was reading the internet just a little bit, and everyone's everyone's going to fall in love with ChatGPT now, and everybody's everyone's going to be the ChatGPT girlfriend, whatever. I bet not. I think we're so wired to care long term about other humans in all sorts of big and small ways that's going to remain. Our obsession with other people. Sounds like you hear a lot of conspiracy theories about me. You probably don't hear a lot of conspiracy theories about AI. You might not care if you did hear one. I think we're not going to watch robots play each other in soccer probably as our main hobby.
As you run OpenAI, the company itself, and you built a lot of rules or frameworks at YC on how to run businesses, and then you've broken a lot of them. Some are there different types of people you hire for this business than you would have had you started a consumer internet company within the executive ranks or a B2B software company or something?
Researchers are very different than product engineers for the most part, and it's
but Brad or Mira or some of the executives, researchers are unique. But does OpenAI bring in a different type of executive, or do you hire for a different trait?
So I mostly have not, sometimes you hire externally for executives, but I'm a big believer that if you generally promote, it's probably a mistake to only promote people to be executives because that could reinforce a monoculture. And, I think you want to bring in some new, very senior people. But we mostly like homegrown talent here. And I think that's a positive given how different what we do is from what you would do somewhere else.
Is there a decision that you've made over the course of OpenAI that felt the most important at the time of making it? And how did you go about making it?
It'd be hard to point just a single one, but the decision that we're going to do what we call iterative deployment, that we're not going to go build AGI in secret and then put it out into the world at once, which was the prevailing wisdom in the Eliezer plan and others. I think that was a quite important decision we made, and it felt like a really important one at the time.
If another company that
betting on language models was an important decision and felt like an important one at the time.
I actually don't know the story of betting on language models. How did that come to be originally?
Well, we had these other projects. We were doing the robot thing and video games, and there was a very small effort. It started with one person looking at language modeling, and Ilya really believed in it. Really believed in the general direction became language models, let's say. And we did GPT-1, we did GPT-2. We started to study scaling laws, scaled up GPT-3, and then we made a big bet that this was what we were going to do. And it looks so, all of these things look so obvious in retrospect. They really don't feel that way at the time.
Last one. In planning for AGI and beyond, you wrote the first AGI will be just a point along the continuum of intelligence, which we spoke about earlier. We think it's likely the progress will continue from there, possibly sustaining the rate of progress we've seen over the past decade for a long period of time. Do you ever personally stop and process or visualize like what the future will look like in that, or is it just too abstract to contemplate?
All the time. I mean, I don't visualize it like, we have these like flying cars in a Star Wars future city and not like that, but like definitely what it means when one person can do the work of hundreds or thousands of well-coordinated people, and what it means when, I don't want to say we can discover all of science, but kind of what it feels like what it would feel to us like as if we could discover all of science.
Be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Sam, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
자, 이렇게 현재 AI 분야에서 가장 영향력 있는 샘 알트만 CEO의 생각을 한번 들어봤는데요. 샘 알트만 CEO가 그리는 AI의 미래는 단순히 기술의 발전을 넘어서 인간 중심 AI를 통해 사회 전체가 더 나은 방향으로 나아갈 수 있는 미래를 그리고 있다는 것을 알 수 있었습니다. 저희도 이에 맞춰서 AI와 함께 사는 세상을 만들어 가야겠죠. 저희 김현 자동화에서는 AI 시대에 발맞추어 AI 프로젝트 전문 에이전시를 운영하고 있습니다. AI를 활용하여 트렌디한 서비스를 만들고 싶으시거나 GPT-4 API를 활용해 서비스를 구축하고 싶으시거나 AI 기능이 탑재된 AI 쇼핑몰을 구축하고 싶다면 더보기란의 링크를 통해 저희 홈페이지에 오셔서 문의해 주시기 바랍니다. 저와 함께 여러분의 AI 사업을 구축해서 성공해 보시죠. 이번 영상은 여기까지입니다. 구독과 좋아요는 영상 제작에 큰 힘이 됩니다. 감사합니다. 키였습니다.